Elon,
Hello.
welcome.
Hi.
You're in Palo Alto, I understand?
Yeah, I'm at Global Engineering Headquarters in Palo Alto.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm actually going to start somewhere a little bit differently than I expected, because I just saw on Twitter a little announcement, and would love to get your thoughts on it. I see you're interviewing Ron DeSantis tomorrow morning. Is that right, on Twitter Spaces? I see.
Yes, I think it's, I need to look at the exact time, but tomorrow morning your time, I think it would be probably correct.
Okay.
Yes, I will be interviewing Ron DeSantis, and he has quite an announcement to make. And it'll be the first time that something like this is happening on social media, and with real-time questions and answers, not scripted. So it's going to be live, and let her up. Let's see what happens.
And you've been tweeting some Tim Scott stuff in the last few days. What should we be thinking about who you're backing? Obviously, this interview tells us something. Can you give us a sense of where your thinking is at the moment?
Yes, I mean, I'm not at this time planning to endorse any particular candidate, but I am interested in X/Twitter being somewhat of a public town square, and where more and more organizations host content and make announcements on Twitter. It's the only place on the internet to really get real time, like down to the minute and second news. And it's so I think it's quite groundbreaking that there'd be a major announcement of this type on social media.
And should we expect, sorry, I don't want to go on too long about this, but in your new role as interviewer rather than interviewee, should we expect more of this? I mean, if it's the town square, are you going to be interviewing other candidates, Democrats? What's your thought of this? If people are willing to come, are you going to be there to execute the town square across the spectrum?
Yes, absolutely. So just as I promised when I do a series of media interviews, I did a range of interviews, and I guess this would be also a media interview. So ranging from sort of on the left, moderate, to what's considered right. And I do think it's important that Twitter have both the reality and the perception of a level playing field, of a place where all voices are heard, and where there's the kind of dynamic interaction that you don't really see anywhere else. I mean, today on Twitter, for example, AOC got into and Ted Cruz got into an argument on Twitter, which was independent of which side you agree with, it's still very entertaining.
So what? And I'm sure tomorrow will be entertaining. We're all going to be tuned into that. But when you approach an interview like that, and obviously a really important election like the one that is coming up, can you just talk a little bit about what are the key issues that really matter for you at this pivotal moment?
You mean matter for me as an individual, or
matter for you as an individual in terms of who leads the country, but also more broadly than that, for the country and for your businesses? I mean, can you give your sense of where the real issues lie here?
Well, I've said publicly that my preference, and I think would be the preference of most Americans, is really to have someone fairly normal in office. I think we'd all be quite happy with that, actually. I think someone that is representative of the moderate views that I think most of the country holds in reality. And but the way things are set up is that we do have a system that seems to push things towards the edges because of the primaries. So in order to win the primary, you've got to win obviously a majority of your party's vote. In both cases, that tends to cause a swing to the left and the right. Although I think things are more complex than simply left and right during the primaries, and then a shift towards the center for the general election. As for what I think is, so I would really just like someone fairly normal and sensible to be the president. That would be great.
So if we go through the four names in the frame at the moment, can you just give a sort of yes, no, and whether they're normal and sensible? We've got Joe Biden.
I think I need to, be careful about these statements. So we'd maybe have to have a few drinks before I would give you the answers to all of them.
I will look forward to that, and I look forward to the conversation tomorrow, and obviously a lot more of those to come over the coming months. So that's great. Thank you very much. So what I wanted to start with, you've just flown in, I think, in the last 20 minutes. You live a pretty hectic lifestyle, but you said that the only true currency is time. Can you give a sense to the people in this room who are scheduled within an inch of their lives, sort of how what is a day in the life of Elon Musk? What does that look like?
Well, my days are very long and complicated, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
And there's a great deal of context switching. There's a meme I like called relating to doom, where it's like fear is not the mind killer, context switching is. So switching context is quite painful. But I do generally try to divide companies so it's predominantly one company on one day. So today is a Tesla day, for example. Although I might end up at Twitter late tonight, and then tomorrow would be partly a Tesla day as well, but sort of half Twitter, and then Thursday would be sort of a half SpaceX, half Tesla day. But these things are somewhat intertwined. So the time management is extremely difficult. And this is going to sound pretty strange, but I only have one part-time assistant.
How many days a week is that? The part-time?
I mean, I suppose the hours she works, it would technically be full-time, but it's not. I do most of the scheduling myself. And the reason I do that is because it's impossible for someone else to know what the priorities are. So, and since the most valuable thing I have is time, I schedule it myself, for the most part.
So, if you come into Tesla today, do you have a series of meetings set up?
Yeah.
Or do you come in with something on your mind and you go in and see people? I mean, how structured is this? Or if you show up at Twitter, in terms of the people working for you, how do they handle that?
So today I have several hours of scheduled meetings at Twitter. So there are a number of things that operate on a weekly cadence. And so those meetings are already set up. And then I have supplemental meetings at the end of the day. But to be clear, I won't be going to sleep until probably 2 a.m. or something like that. I'll be working almost the entire time.
And if you're scheduling this yourself, is AI going to be helpful over the next few years to help you? Are you going to be using technology to help you manage that?
I guess we'll all be using technology. I don't use a lot of AI myself day to day. I mean, Tesla AI is actually very advanced for real world AI. It's the most advanced real world AI by far. And in fact, if positions were swapped and it was, say, up to Microsoft and OpenAI to create the best large language model, or if the tasks were swapped, Tesla was given the task of making the most competitive large language model, and Microsoft and OpenAI were tasked with self-driving, Tesla would win. Okay. I don't think people understand the degree of the capability of Tesla's AI system. While I don't use AI a lot personally, Tesla uses it a tremendous amount.
We'll get onto that in a second, if that's okay. But one final thing in terms of just the management of what you do with your life. You're running 3 very big companies. You have very big stakes and ownership control of 2 of those at least. What is your succession plan if you suddenly can't execute what you're doing, both in terms of who runs the companies, but as importantly, who votes those shares in terms of what happens longer term and strategically? What have you got a plan for all of those?
Yeah, succession is one of the toughest age-old problems. It's plagued countries, kings, prime ministers, and presidents and CEOs since the dawn of history. There is no obvious solution. I mean, there are particular individuals identified as that I've told the board, look, if something happens to me unexpectedly, this is my recommendation for taking over. So in all cases, the board is aware of who my recommendation is, which they may choose to. It's up to them, of course. They may choose to go a different direction, but there is in the worst case scenario, this is who should run the company. The control question is a much tougher question, and something that I'm wrestling with, and I'm frankly open to ideas, because it certainly is true that the companies that I have created and are creating collectively possess immense capability. And so the stewardship of them is incredibly important. I want to make sure that the stewardship is ultimately accrues to the benefit of humanity. That's the idea, is the furtherance of civilization. Not that we're always successful in that, but that is aspirationally our goal. So I have one idea which is sort of partly in place, which is to create kind of a sort of an educational institution that would control really most of my vote. But this is not a case of automatically. I'm definitely not of the school of automatically giving my kids some share of the companies, even if they have no interest or inclination, or ability to manage the companies. I think that's a mistake. But it's a very hard problem to solve. And then who should be on the board of directors of the educational institution is also a very, very hard job to solve. So I think probably some disaggregation of control would make sense. I'm really just kind of thinking out loud creatively here.
But it sounds like it's something that you need to get planning of who those people are going to be, because as you've said, when you look at SpaceX, you look at Tesla, you look at Twitter, these matter to society a lot. Yeah. And having the right people to take those votes on the future of where they go and where money gets spent is fairly important.
Yes, absolutely. Now, the goals of the companies, the achievement of those goals varies considerably in difficulty. The original goal of Tesla was to accelerate the advent of sustainable energy, which actually I think we've done that to a significant degree, and it's kind of auto industry CEOs to often acknowledge Tesla's role in accelerating electric vehicles, and so that I feel has a lot of momentum. They're still solving self-driving, which we're aspirationally hoping to do this year, and so Tesla's got a long way to go, but the execution plan is relatively clear, and that execution plan will generate a lot of positive cash flow for the company. So it's a fairly obvious thing to do. With SpaceX, it's a harder problem because the long-term objective is to make life multiplanetary with a self-sustaining city on Mars, which is likely to be very cash flow negative at first, and very much a long-term. Let's just say the target market on Mars is small. You got to think long term here.
You're also going to have to get on very well with those you go with, I would imagine.
Yes, definitely. Sanity will be a prime requirement for and stability for traveling to Mars. You don't want someone going nuts and opening the airlock in the middle of the night.
Right.
So SpaceX is a harder problem because it's much a long-term goal and with a lot more money lost along the way. So got to make sure that happens.
And is that the sort of thing, just to stay on SpaceX, and we'll go to Twitter and Tesla in a second, but is that the sort of thing that you'd like to lock in to the goals of SpaceX, that Mars remains the ultimate ambition of this, come what may? Is that important to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's to make life multiplanetary such that, and the key threshold for multiplanetary is that if the supply ships from Earth stop coming for any reason, that Mars does not die out. That's the critical great filter. If you talk about things in terms of the Fermi paradox, the great filter is Mars being self-sustaining without any resupply ships from Earth. Until we reach that point, we're really just a one-planet civilization with an extension. But the point at which the planets are self-sustaining, or Mars is self-sustaining, even in a worst-case scenario of Earth civilization either dying with a bang or a whimper, then Mars would have a much better chance of surviving. So the intent here overall is to ensure that the light of consciousness, which appears to be just a tiny candle in a vast darkness. I frequently get asked, have I seen any evidence of aliens, and I have not. Apart from the fact that I did at one point have an alien registration card when I was getting my green card. It said alien registration.
Indeed. Possibly a slightly different type of alien. But so, do you think will you live to see Mars happen?
I hope to live to see the first humans on Mars, but I think it will take some period of time beyond that to make Mars self-sustaining. So it's at least 20 years from the first visit to make Mars sustaining, is my guess, and it may be 40 or 50. And that's assuming you really go for it.
Right.
That's a tough one, but like I said, I think important for improving the survivability of civilization.
And who's going to pay for that? I mean, are your investors going to put the money up to do that? Are you going to expect government to fund that? Where does that money come from? Because as you say, you can make a return on Starlink, you can make a return on launching satellites for other people and space tourism, but I mean that's a tougher return, isn't it?
Yeah, I think long term the value of it will be incredibly high. it's just beyond the planning horizon of
Right.
most people or most investors. I mean, obviously, if there's a thriving city on Mars and there's a lot of interplanetary commerce, and SpaceX is the primary provider of that, it would be immensely valuable. So, but you know, the important thing is that there be this self-sustaining, colony, and I think we generally operate with too much of an assumption that civilization is robust, and nothing could really take it down. A sentiment that has been common throughout history among empires shortly before they crumbled. So, and I have to say, there's a little bit of late stage empire vibes going on right now.
Yeah, for sure. Are you, yeah. Is AI something that, in your view, accelerates the risk of that or increases the risk of that outcome?
I think it does, yeah. I mean, we could definitely make a city of Mars self-sustaining without AI or without sort of AGI, which is generally artificial general intelligence or superintelligence. So I think that is it's not necessary for anything we're doing, but it is happening and happening very quickly. So there is a risk that advanced AI either eliminates or constrains humanity's growth.
I was more thinking the opposite. Does it increase the chance that the planet self-implodes and those things come true? I mean, how concerned are you about these developments right now, sort of accelerating your bad case scenario here?
Well, I mean, the development of artificial digital sort of superintelligence is very much a double-edged sword. So it's if you have a genie that can grant you anything, that can also do anything, that necessarily presents a danger. And I expect the first uses of AI to be, or certainly the first government uses of AI to be weapons technology. So just having more advanced weapons on the battlefield that can react faster than any human could. That's really what AI will be capable of. I mean, future wars between advanced countries, or at least countries that have significant drone capability, will be very much the drone wars.
So I want to get back to AI because this is big stuff, and I'd like to talk about it in more detail. But I do want to come back to the present from a long way in the future. You just hired a new CEO, Linda Yaccarino, an ad veteran into Twitter. You usually focus on hiring engineers. Linda is a very different person. Can you just quickly tell us about your courtship? How did that go down?
Well, we had conversations over a number of months just relating to advertising. And then Linda felt that it would be very helpful for the advertisers to see me in person, so invited me down to a conference in Miami, which was very helpful, and met with a number of advertisers personally to assure them that Twitter is a good place to advertise, and generally in fact that hate speech has declined, which it has, and that the quality of the system, especially with respect to scammers and spammers, is dramatically better than it used to be. We've gotten rid of, at this point, well over 90% of the scams and scams. The scams and spam on Twitter. So it should be quite rare at this point that you see a scam. So we've also rolled out sort of freedom of
just to be clear, when you say you got rid of 90% of the scams, is that the same thing as the bots, or is this scams in general, and bots is a different animal here?
They would typically use bots for scams.
Yeah. But you haven't taken the bots down 90%?
No, I think we have, actually.
You think you have? Okay.
Yeah, I think we have, yeah. But maybe more than 90% at least. It is now much harder to operate a bot farm on Twitter and have it yield any advantage. So dramatic improvement in bots, dramatic improvement in ability to detect sort of troll armies, which is a little different. That's where you've got, say, 100 people in a warehouse in a low-wage country, each of which are sitting at a desk with 100 phones. So you've got 10,000 actual people, and they will then act together to brigade a particular subject, or make something seem very popular when it is not. And we've been able to defeat almost all of them. We think very few of them are actually still able to act.
So
the quality of the system has gotten a lot better.
Okay. So if you said to Linda that you are going to keep speaking your mind, whatever the commercial impact of that. And has she agreed to that? Is she happy with that? Are you aligned?
Yeah.
Okay. And in her role as CEO, does she have any say over moderation, or is that under you, or do you do that together?
Well, the general principle is that we will hew close to the law. So for any given country, we will try to adhere as closely to the law as possible. Now, laws vary between countries, and we can't simply flout the law in another country because they will simply cut us off. But the general principle is do whatever we can to enable free and open communications between people, provided they're not, like I said, breaking
And
the
she's
law.
aligned on that plan,
Yeah.
that focus.
Yeah, there is an important thing, which is like that obviously doesn't mean that, say, advertisers should be forced to appear next to any content. So we've also developed adjacency controls that ensure that if what you're advertising is, like Disney, for example, is a big advertiser. If Disney is advertising a children's movie, they want the content nearby to be sort of family friendly. That's totally understandable. So it's not like advertisers have to appear next to content that they don't agree with.
And can you, so some people say you can be a little erratic with your tweeting, or at least tweet a broad range of content. Does anybody say, I don't want to be adjacent to Elon Musk? Is that something that's happened on the platform?
I've never heard that yet.
Okay.
But nope, never heard that, even
okay.
directly.
And did that come up with Linda at all? Sort of what you tweet and whether that was something that could affect advertisers? Did she ask you about that?
She did, in fact, at the conference that we did
Right,
in Miami.
okay.
So free speech is paramount.
Fine. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your vision for Twitter as a community and as a conversation. You've talked about your desire to maximize unregretted time. Can you explain what that means and how you measure that?
So previously Twitter was mostly focused on this number they called MDAO, monetizable daily active users. But the problem is that when you look closely at that, a bunch of those users never even went to Twitter. They would go to, they would see a notification on their phone about a tweet, but they wouldn't actually click through the site.
Right.
So what really matters is true user seconds of screen time. So that's the figure we track right now. And that's based on the screen time as reported to us by iOS, Android, and the browser. It would have to be the amount of time the app is in the foreground, which I think is the most rigorous way to assess this.
So when you say unregretted, sorry, please keep going.
Exactly. So in terms of unregretted, that's a little harder to measure. But we can certainly gather it anecdotally, which is to say that if you spent half an hour on Twitter yesterday, what percentage of the... Yeah, I think Twitter may be somewhat of an outlier in that there were a lot of people doing things that didn't seem to have a lot of value. And I think that's true probably most Silicon Valley companies. Maybe not to the degree to which it was at Twitter, but it's still, there's potential for significant cuts, I think, at other companies without affecting their productivity, in fact, increasing their productivity. So, in any given company, there are people who help move things forward and people who sort of try to slam the brakes on. And Twitter was in a situation where you'd have a meeting of 10 people, and one person with an accelerator and nine with a set of brakes. So you didn't go very far.
Right.
So now we're gung-ho about releasing functionality, even with at a little bit of risk to site stability, so long as it's not too serious. And I think at this point it's probably fair to say we've introduced more functionality in the last 6 months than Twitter has in the last 6 years.
And in terms of outages, there were some outages early on. Are you confident things are stable now?
Well, outages are not unusual. Instagram recently had an outage, for example. It was reported on Twitter, ironically. We've had outages, but not massive ones, and they've generally been brief and limited in scope.
Okay. Do you regret buying it? You tried to get out of it, or are you now happy you bought it?
Well, all's well that ends well. We'll see how it ends.
Has it ended well yet, or we still got to wait and see?
I think we're hopefully on the comeback arc.
So, one of the things you have talked about, you bought it for 44 billion. You've talked about it one day being worth 250. I think, in internal meetings. Can you just talk about how you get there? What is the bigger vision? I mean, you want to bring back advertisers now, and are they coming back, by the way?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you give any idea of the scale of the comeback in terms of who you lost and who's coming back?
Well, I think it'll be very significant. So the advertising agencies, at this point of all, lifted their warnings on Twitter. So appreciate the fact that Group M, for example, removed the sort of their concern label over Twitter, which is a very big deal. And so I think at this point, I expect almost all advertisers to return.
Okay.
We've also done a lot more to make the advertising more relevant to users, so that we show users things that they're more likely to be interested in buying. Sounds obvious, but
Right. That's what tends to happen, yeah.
sounds super obvious. I mean, just basic stuff like if you do a search on Twitter, previously the search banner ad did not take the search terms into account, which is pretty insane. So just show a random ad.
Okay.
Whereas obviously show an ad that is, matches your search.
Sounds worth doing. So just quickly, you talked about the sort of single app that does messaging and does finance and other things. I mean, can you just enlarge a little bit on sort of how you get there and why America wants that?
Well, obviously it'll be up to people to decide if they want it. It's like, do we make something that is useful enough that you want to use it more frequently? Great, that's our goal. So we're not going to do anything to stop people leaving the app or try to trap them in the app, but just provide enough compelling functionality that over time people's usage of the platform grows.
So in 10 years' time, is advertising still going to be dominant on Twitter?
I think advertising will always play a role. At some point, say 10 years from now, it may not play the largest role, but it will play the largest role for at least a few years to come.
So I want to do a quick fire round of questions. Just, imagine that you're late at night, you're sitting there tweeting a few rapid fire responses to stuff. And I'm just going to ask you a few questions, and if you can just give me short answers, and then I want to go on to AI and talk a little bit about some of the deeper points that you started making earlier. So first one, will Twitter be public again in 5 years? Okay. Do you think the HQ will still be in San Francisco? Okay, not good so far. Let's try a couple more. Which decade are we going to crack artificial general intelligence?
I think this one.
This one, okay. So it's that soon. Okay. Are you going to take a SpaceX trip yourself?
I will at some point, yeah. Not sure when, but it would be nice.
Which is the most exciting country to build a Tesla plant in right now?
Well, we did make an announcement that Mexico would be our next location outside the U.S. And picked a site and everything. So there's that, and then we'll probably pick another location towards the end of this year.
Is India interesting? Are you still a fan of crypto?
Well, I mean, I'm not advising anyone to buy crypto or bet the farm on, Dogecoin or anything like that.
Okay.
Don't bet the farm on Dogecoin. You might even think maybe you should, but let me advise you, that would be have some ways.
Okay.
So Dogecoin is my sort of favorite cryptocurrency because it has the best humor and has dogs.
I did, however, look at the price of it yesterday. It's lower than it was.
I don't know, maybe, it's like a friend of mine has a saying that the most ironic explanation is the most likely. And the most ironic outcome for currency would be that the thing that was made as a joke to make fun of cryptocurrencies, most ironic outcome would become that it becomes the global currency.
Okay, we'll wait and see. Final one. Can you rank the US and China on their development of AI each out of 10?
The US very much has the most advanced AI. So this is, you say like China's close behind, certainly, and has the resources to scale and to optimize. The biggest single advances in AI still come from the US and Europe. But, all right, so it's hard to give an exact number or score. It's more like...
But there's a big gap.
There's a gap. That gap looks like it's on the order of...
A narrowing or...
It's hard to tell. I suspect it will narrow to some...
Can you talk a little bit about, you've created a new AI company yourself. Obviously, there's a huge amount of energy and activity in this space, or at least it's been talked about. I mean, what do you want to do yourself in this space beyond Tesla and the stuff you talked about earlier? What is that new
Well, I think there should be a significant third horse in the race here. We've got OpenAI and Microsoft, Google DeepMind, and probably there should be a third horse in the race. So there'll be more on that soon.
But is it something that will interact with the data of Twitter and the capability of Tesla? Is it something that tries to bring what you talked about earlier in terms of capability together and become that third player? Is that what you're talking about?
To some degree, I don't want to jump the gun here on announcements, but OpenAI has a relationship with Microsoft that seems to work fairly well. So it's possible that XAI and Twitter and Tesla would have something similar.
You talked about the importance of regulation, and you called for this moratorium. I mean, the history of regulating tech has been checkered. It's been very hard for regulators to keep up with tech, let alone get ahead of it. What do you think actually needs to happen that practically could in this space to try to change that? Because obviously the history of this is not encouraging.
Yeah, I mean, I think there should be, I've been pushing hard for a long time. I met with a number of senior senators and people in Congress and the White House to advocate for AI regulation, starting with an insight committee that is formed of independent parties as well as perhaps participants from the leaders in industry, and that oversight committee gains, or I should say, that insight committee gains insight into what various companies are up to, and to the degree that there's competitive dynamics there, you can obviously you would sequester board members who are perhaps have conflicts. But anyway, you figure out some sort of regulatory board, and they start off gaining insight, and then have proposed rulemaking, and then that will get commented on by industry, and then hopefully we have some sort of oversight rules that improve safety, just as we do with aircraft with the FAA and spacecraft, and cars with NHTSA, and food and drugs with the Food and Drug Administration.
Right. And how would that work in such a global thing as we're talking about, where AI and the relative advance between countries is going to be very, very important? Is that something that is globalizable? Is that?
Well, really, the key question is, will China, cooperate with the West? That remains to be seen. But I would still advocate some degree of oversight. I mean, we have regulatory oversight of aircraft, for example, and yet the U.S. is still very much doing great on the aircraft front. Right. So it makes more aircraft than any other place. So just because you have FAA regulation doesn't mean that it's necessarily slowed down very much.
Okay. So your view would be that the AI changes today lock in tech giants, the Microsoft and the Googles of this world. Is there also a scenario where it actually helps to bring in new players and change that dynamic, or is that a much more unlikely outcome?
There are a lot of AI startups. The thing that's becoming tricky is that you really need three things to compete. You need talented people. You need a lot of expensive compute, and you need access to data. So whoever's succeeding on those three will win. So now that the cost of compute has gotten astronomical, it's now kind of sort of minimum ante, I would say, minimum would be $250 million of server hardware, minimum. That's just to relevant anyway.
So the startups are more likely to piggyback off what the others are doing rather than compete directly themselves, is what you're saying.
Yeah, to train a big model, a model of probably GPT-5 size, I wouldn't be surprised if they use at least 30,000, maybe 50,000 H100s, which are the latest GPUs. It's not quite the right word, but the latest technology from NVIDIA. And then you need to run inference as well. It's a lot of the GPUs are at this point considerably harder to get than drugs. Actually, that's really not a high bar in San Francisco.
You can tell us more about that later, but yeah, it's okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Couple of things I just wanted to go into on AI, which I'd love your perspective on. What does it mean for society in terms of, is this going to embed wealth and power in a very small subset and create a big widening of inequality? Is it going to democratize and create the opposite? What is your sense of where this heads?
In terms of access to goods and services, I think AI will be ushering an age of abundance, assuming that we're in a benign AI scenario. I think the AI will be able to make goods and services very inexpensively. And so in anything that is a product or a service where there's not artificial scarcity created, such as like, I want to live exactly in, neighborhood houses. It's like, okay, well, there's only 100 houses there. So, that would still have scarcity. Or a unique artwork would have scarcity. But anything that does not have scarcity that we deliberately designed to be scarce will be plentiful for everyone in a benign scenario.
And in the unbenign scenario?
Well, there's a wide range of.
But what's the thing that you're most worried about when you look at, when you've been talking for years about the need for regulation? What is the scenario that really keeps you up at night?
Well, I don't think the AI is going to try to destroy all humanity, but it might put us under strict controls. I mean, and there's a non-zero chance of it going Terminator. It's not 0%, but it's. I think it's a small likelihood of annihilating humanity, but it's not zero. We wanted that probability to be as close to zero as possible. And like I said, of AI assuming control for the safety of all the humans and taking over all the computing systems and weapon systems of Earth, and effectively being like some sort of Uber nanny.
But isn't another scenario?
If you say the AI, like, well, like let's say you're a Miss World contestant, hypothetically.
It's unlikely. Let's face it.
And you say, what do you want? And it's I want world peace. And it's like, okay, well, one way to achieve world peace is to take all the weapons away from the humans so they can no longer use them, and to punish any humans that engage in extraterritorial activity.
But isn't the more likely nasty outcome that rather than AI taking over and being the ultimate nanny that keeps us all doing stuff that is super safe and it wants us to, that actually somebody nefariously harnesses that power to achieve societal control, stroke, military superiority, and that actually some country around the world decides to use it in a different way?
Yes, that's what I mean by like AI uses as a weapon.
Right.
And the pen is mightier than the sword. So one of the first places we have to be careful of AI being used is in social media to manipulate public opinion. So the reason that Twitter is going to a primarily subscriber-based system is because it is dramatically harder to create. It's like, quote, 10,000 times harder to create an account that has a verified phone number from a credible carrier, that has a credit card, and that pays a small amount of money per month, and have those credit cards and phone numbers be highly distributed, not clustered, is incredibly difficult. So whereas in the past, someone could create a million fake accounts for a penny apiece, and then manipulate, have something appear to be very, very much liked by the public when in fact it is not, or promoted and retweeted when in fact it is not, its popularity is not real, and essentially game the system. So the bias towards a subscription-based verification, I think, is very powerful, and that really you won't be able to trust any social media company that does not do this, because it will simply be overrun with bots to such an extreme degree.
So if we take it back to where we started, if you look at the election that's coming up, how big a role will this big shift in AI capability over the last few months, which will obviously continue through the next year, how big an impact is this going to play, do you think, in the messaging and the way that people get told the different pitches of the candidates?
I think that's something we need to be on the lookout for in a big way, is to make sure that we're minimizing the impact of AI manipulation. We're certainly very much taking that seriously at X Twitter, X/Twitter. And I think we're putting in place all of the protections to minimize and certainly detect when we see large-scale manipulation of the system.
Okay. But beyond Twitter, are you worried about this for the election in general?
Yeah. There probably will be attempts to use AI to manipulate the public, and some of it will be successful. And if not this election, for sure the next one.
Okay. I've got two more questions on AI, if you've got the time, and then just a little bit on China and Tesla, if that's okay. The first thing is, we talk a lot in terms of AI about the next 5 to 10 years and what the impact is going to be on jobs and some of these things. If you look out on a much longer time frame, given the speed and scale of the change, and you look to your grandkids and great-grandkids, can you just give us a sense of what what is it going to be like to be human? How much is this going to change the fundamental nature of how we operate as a race at this point?
I think it's going to change a lot, especially if you go further out into the future. I mean, there will be, everything will be automatic. I mean, there'll be household robots that you can fully talk to as though they're people that can help you around the house or be a companion or whatever the case may be. There will be humanoid robots throughout, factories, and cars will also be all automatic. And anything that where intelligence can be applied, even modest intelligence will be automated. Say like 10, 20 years from now.
And will we be connected to that technology through a Neuralink type device?
Maybe.
Is that where this, in your view, obviously, is that where this heads?
Well, a high bandwidth interface from cortex to the your sort of computing or AI tertiary layer, which already exists. It's just that we don't have a high bandwidth connection. We've got our limbic system, which is our sort of foundational element. That's sort of our instincts and desires and whatnot. Then our cortex on top of that, which is our thinking part of our brain. And then we've got a tertiary digital layer, which is currently in the form of our phones and computers and laptops and whatnot, and all the applications. And the constraint on better merging or the constraint on having human interests and machine interests be aligned is the bandwidth, especially the output. So if you select at what speed can you output to a computer, it's using voice or your fingers, which move very slowly. So you're talking about maybe 10 bits per second or some fairly small. So with the Neuralink, you can increase that by a million.
So everything just speeds up.
Speeds up, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, this is obviously in a relatively benign scenario because there's a question of not just let's say it's a benign scenario. How do we even appreciate or understand what the computer's doing? How do we go along for the ride? And if we have a brain-machine interface that's a million times faster, then we're more like we'll go along for the ride a lot better.
Right.
Than if we're interfacing with a phone using two slow-moving meat sticks. Yeah.
If you put it like that. And in terms of, you have a lot of kids, many in this room have kids, what skills do they need to have? What are the 3 skills that you think are most important for them, that you're trying to give them to be prepared and well positioned for this?
Well, I think it's important to have a broad range of understanding in many different subjects. So I think general knowledge is important. So you at least have some clue of what you don't know in different areas. And then go deep in areas where your child has a strong interest and ability. So finding that overlap of where is my child both interested in this and has some ability to be successful, then if you can find that Venn diagram overlap, then obviously encouraging that is a good thing. And we are obviously headed to a high-tech world, so some basic understanding of computers and software and artificial intelligence is probably a good idea.
But the actual broad thrust of, jobs will change, but it'll be more AI enabling and making it better and easier rather than wholesale, complete change of the skills you need.
I mean, it depends on what time frame we're talking about here. So if you say like over 20, 30-year time frame, I think things will be transformed beyond belief. Okay. You probably won't recognize society in 30 years. Like, I do think we're fairly close. You asked me about artificial general intelligence. I think we're perhaps only 3 years, maybe 6 years away from it this decade. In fact, arguably, we are on the event horizon of the black hole that is artificial superintelligence.
So I'm going to ask one final question, and I'm going to see if you've got 2 minutes to take a couple of questions from the floor. And it comes back to China, which you talked about a little bit. You have a very big business in China, in Tesla. And obviously, you're on that geopolitical fault line that's getting potentially interesting. To what extent is this affecting your decision-making around sort of how you put assets and stuff on the ground? And how concerned are you about that as a business person, and a lot of people in this room have business in China, about that getting very, very difficult for a Western business?
Well, there is fundamentally an issue that's coming to a head with Taiwan, and it's unclear when exactly push will come to shove, but it seems that there's a good chance push will come to shove. It's trending in that direction. I dread to think what would happen. The results would be for the global economy would be absolutely catastrophic. But China has been very clear about its goals on China and including Taiwan as part of China. So one does not need to read between the lines. One can simply read the lines. They were very clear, and they're not getting.
And is the biggest concern, despite the prospect of conflict itself, obviously a lot of the world's high-end chips come out of Taiwan. I mean, how catastrophic would that be if that was cut off?
Well, there's even more that comes out of China. So China does so much of the world's heavy lifting on manufacturing, especially if the manufacturing is, simply hard work and say not particularly glamorous. China just does an immense amount of hard work that most people have no idea how much hard work they do. Being cut off from Taiwan is much less of a concern than being cut off from China. Now, China would reciprocally suffer, of course, because I would say that the economies of China and Taiwan they're like conjoined twins with the Western economy, with the rest of the world. So China and the rest of the world being conjoined twins from an economic standpoint will mean that the separation is going to be dire indeed if that happens. I hope it does not happen. So, and there's no easy solution here. But if there's any path to a diplomatic solution, we should really take that seriously.
Great. Do you have time to take a few questions from the floor, Elon?
Sure.
Sure. Does anybody have a question they'd like to pose? We'll go here and then here.
Thanks, Elon. Thanks for joining us. I'm the founder of a real estate business in Newcastle in the northeast of England. We manufacture and export more cars from the northeast than the whole of Italy. Would you let me build you a Tesla factory in the northeast of England?
Thanks for the offer. So I would strongly consider England for a future location of the Gigafactory.
Thank you. I'll get you.
So you will consider it. Are you actively considering it?
We're not currently looking at new locations, but we will probably towards the end of this year.
I'll send you some plans, okay?
Davide, here, please.
Thank you for your time. Fusion, lots of scientists say could change the world. Planet is the sun. All life on this planet and on Mars depends on fusion, the sun itself. Can I ask you why a man of your brilliant brain, resources, and talent is not actually focusing on fusion, which I think could be a game changer for society, and rather than on Twitter, where there are many media, decent companies that can do it, and I would say it almost in a trivial way.
Well, I think we already have a giant fusion reactor in the sky that's called the sun that shows up every day. Which always like, if you want to know what standing in front of a fusion reactor feels like, just go and stand in front of the sun. Just walk outside. That's what a giant fusion reactor feels like, because that's what the sun is. It converts about 4.5 million tons of mass to energy every second, and requires no maintenance. You don't have to refuel it. You don't have to maintain it. My recommendation for fusion is solar power and batteries, and we can easily power all of Earth with photovoltaics and batteries. Not easily, but there's just a very clear path to do so, and no miracles required, just work.
Interesting.
I'm also an advocate of wind and of nuclear fission, geothermal, hydro, and whatnot.
We'll take a couple more. One here, and then the lady at the back.
Thank you. As you're considering exposure to China, and particularly in the EV space and with the battery supply chain, what's your process for evaluating political risk in the near and midterm? I
guess I just talk to my team, read the news, assess the opinion on Twitter, I suppose. There's a very deep analysis you can get on Twitter from people that are world experts on a particular subject. I don't know. I think we try to prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and make sure we have factories in geographically diversified regions of the world where the supply chain is as localized as possible. This is important also for force majeure situations. So if there are earthquakes, wildfires, riots, revolutions, ice storms, heat waves, you name it. I think I've seen it all at this point. So you want to have you want to have a supply chain that does not inherit force majeure from all of Earth, because something that's going to happen somewhere. It's a big planet. So that's why I think it's important to have localized supply chains with factories in many geographies.
Last question from the lady at the back. Thank you.
Yeah, you famously tweeted that you thought that population collapse was a much bigger risk to humanity than climate change. What do you think families, even companies, can do to ensure that more of us want to have more children?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's very telling if you look at the birth rates, which are just publicly available. You can look at, say, the birth rate last year for every country, available online. And you can look at the trend in birth rates, and it's just very clear that the trend has been strongly downward, and that we've recently hit all-time lows. You'd think if, during COVID, what else are you got to do? You might as well have a kid. But it didn't happen, actually. We had a big drop in birth rate during COVID. Maybe an increase in divorces, too, since they spent a lot of time with their significant other. So I think generally, so simply changing people's mind about the goodness of having kids, it's very important to have kids in order to continue civilization. And I think sometimes it's viewed as, kids are viewed as an imposition on the world. I don't think that's the case at all, or that people sometimes think there are too many people in the world. That's certainly not the case. You can fit all of the humans on Earth on one floor in the city of New York. It would be uncomfortable, but just to give you a sense of the cross-sectional area of Earth that is human is very tiny. It just seems big if you're in a big city. But for the vast majority of the Earth, if you're given a task from a plane of dropping a bowling ball and you have to hit someone, you'd miss. I almost never hit anyone. So the point is that you very rarely go over a person in an aircraft. You fly from LA to New York. There are vast areas of land with no one at all. Anyway, I think we want to just generally have it be socially encouraged to have kids. I think certainly companies need to support employees that have kids. I think in terms of government incentives, there should be some, I think, tax breaks for having kids, or make it financially not burdensome to have children. And so it's worth bearing in mind, autonomy aside, if someone doesn't have kids, what you're actually asking is that someone else's kids take care of you when you're old. And that doesn't seem quite right, because that's what they'll be forced to do, absent automation, is that someone else's kids will have to take care of you when you're old. And so I think, whatever, one way or another, we need to solve this birth rate issue, or civilization will dwindle to nothing.
Isn't that where AI comes in? It'll do all the jobs for us, so we can handle a potentially lower population, or what you're talking about.
There will be robot nannies that are very confident, so that will help.
Good. Elon Musk, thank you very much for joining us.